Levi, it's great to see you. How have you been since we last spoke?
Very good, Rob. I can see out of both eyes, which is good. I had a little firework accident on the 4th of July.
Yeah, tell us
But
about that. Tell our audience about that.
my eye puffed up, a lot of pressure, couldn't see out of it very well. It was like milky. And then slowly every day, I'd wear a patch for a while, got a little better. And now my vision in my left eye is actually better than it was before the accident. So my optometrist had to actually reduce my prescription. So
Only God. That's amazing. And,
it's some kind of metaphor, I guess.
and in the midst of a chaotic, unprecedented 2020, you've written another book called Take Back Your Life. And it covers a lot of ground, actually, doesn't it? It covers a lot of the writing that you've been journeying on over the last several years. But what was the kind of genesis behind this concept? I know you've done a series in your church about it, but for those that are thinking, what's with that title? What's it about? Share what you know.
Yeah, it's crazy, Rob. About a year and a half ago, we started thinking, man, a lot of people aren't going to read a whole book. You know, sadly, most people don't finish books, period. The average American doesn't read one full book in a year on an average.
No way.
So as an author, that's very discouraging.
Yeah.
And as a human, that's discouraging. But the thought was, okay, well, instead of being angry about that or frustrated about that or just, opining about how Netflix is ruining America or Western civilization, instead saying, okay, maybe it's just because it's too hard of a barrier, intimidating wise, to read a whole book. What if I could make it simpler, maybe less intimidating? So I've written a lot about emotional intelligence and self-management and a lot about grief and hope. And so the thought was, let's create a product right in the middle of those two that would address both topics, kind of like Frankenstein, of those, my first couple books, I Declare War and Eyes of a Lion, but make it a devotional, maybe one little like spoon-fed. Like, it's not so intimidating to read one article on Wikipedia or one, news thing. So what if it was a 40-day devotional? That's kind of what we ended with. 40 days to take back your life, and as God would have it, we would release it in the midst of this pandemic when more people than ever were realizing they have more issues and more dysfunction than they thought they did.
Totally. So it feels as though it's custom tailor-made for this time. It's just God's timing's made it flow beautifully into this season.
Yeah, God does all things well. And I mean, it's obviously a perennial evergreen topic because we always struggle with grief. But as God would have it, we were working on a message that would be, like you said, the quintessential thing we all need to take back our lives from the dysfunction, from the unhealth, from the toxicity, from the fighting, the political. James says, where do all these fights come from? I think we look at our world and go, there's racial division, there's the political divide in America, of course. And I know it's the same in Europe and everywhere else. There's always this stuff. And it's like, where is this coming from? James says, hey, you want to know? It comes from here, man. The problem's not the Democrats. The problem's not the Republicans. The problem's not the Brexit or the whatever or this. You know what the problem is? Look in here. You got all kind of dysfunction up in here. And so this book is hopefully going to help us to look inside and square off against our own worst enemy, which is us.
I love that. Where does the writing heart come from? I mean, you're obviously really passionate about it. Like, what does the process look like for you, Levi? Is it messy, like a true creative? Is it something that flows out of something you're wrestling with yourself? I mean, This Means War, there was lots of anecdotes and personal metaphors about everything that you wrestle with in thought life and mindset, all that stuff. Like, where does it begin for you in terms of writing?
Yeah, great question, Rob. I would say, first of all, words move me. I love words. I get shivers with certain sentences. If you were to go through, I love words. I'm a word fanatic, and I love the right combination of words. When I was a child, I used to lie in bed, and as I would fall asleep, I would say sentences and count whether there was an even or odd number of syllables in the sentences.
Wow.
And I would recraft them if they were odd to make them even. And I still catch myself, there's a name for it, but basically it's testing the rhythmic kind of feel of certain sentences and saying them again and again to myself after I've said them. I just love words. And so I read almost neurotically, but I also love to write because out of the overflow of reading, I've written every book I've written because I despaired at the thought of the world not having that book in it.
Wow.
And I've written what I wanted to read myself.
Oh, please say that again. That was gold.
Well, I grieve at the thought of any of the books I've written not existing. I wanted to read them myself. I wrote Swipe Right about sex and romance because it was the book I wished I had read when I was a teenager. Yes. And in my own battles with my own dysfunction, I wrote what I wanted to read. And in writing Eyes of a Lion, I wrote what I would have comforted me when my daughter died. So that's why I write. And today, as I communicate this Take Back Your Life message, it's one in the COVID pandemic I have needed. I didn't know how broken I was till I had months sitting around, not distracted by airplanes and speaking engagements, to realize there's more dysfunction in my heart than I knew there was there.
And you talk about this book being a self-analysis tool. A lot of us don't give adequate attention to areas of dysfunction, and we really don't like articulating our dysfunction. So how does self-analysis and self-reflection play out in your life?
Most of the time, we don't want to know what's wrong with us, and we don't allow there to be enough silence for our souls to communicate to us what's actually happening inside of our hearts. If we are quiet and still, we not only will hear the voice of the Holy Spirit, but we will hear our own sickly souls crying out for nutrients. Wow. And I think when we look in the mirror, we're able to say, oh, okay, I see where I really am. But you can't be cured of an ill you won't admit's there. So in this book, I hope to give people even just the space to breathe, to ask questions, to be honest enough with themselves to know, to admit maybe that the problem's not their wife or their job or the economy or who's in the White House, or it's their own sinful brokenness, and to actually reckon with those things. Now, is there a reason to vote? Is there a reason to deal with your confront a lovingly a spouse? Yeah, of course. But that's after you've dealt with your own demons.
I love that. You do talk about having a genius and a demon, right? This juxtaposition. How do you regulate your thought life, and how do you regulate the voice of God being louder than the voice of the devil?
Well, it's like when I tithe. A tithe is not just 10% of your money; it's the first 10%.
Yeah.
So when I give God time, I don't just give God time. I give him the best time. I give him the first time. So when I wake up, I give him the first and the best, because I'm at my best as I watch the sunrise. I'm at my best when the day's begun, before the emails and before that. So I keep my phone charged in another room, face down. And when I wake up, I don't do this perfectly, but I did it today. I make a beeline to the coffee. And as I have my first cup of coffee in my backyard, I have a little fire pit. The sun's rising. There's trees I planted 4 years ago that now are giving me good shade. That's an analogy. If you want trees in 4 years, you better sow some seeds today. You know, some of you right now, as you watch this, you want shade from trees you haven't even planted yet. So you have to water them for half a decade to get what you want tomorrow. So it can happen, but you know, the time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. That's the best time. The second best time is today. So when I give God my first and my best, when I'm silent before him, I do my meditations, which I know is a weird word. Christians get weird with meditation. It's actually a Bible word. That's where it started. So as I'm meditating, as I'm still, as I'm praying, as I'm breathing, as I do that, then I'm at my best. So I've got an interview with Rob today. It's an important interview. I need to be at my best several hours before that as I let God breathe on me for what's in front of me.
And some people will be more prone, be it personality wise, DNA, just the way they carry themselves. Some people will be more prone to self-analysis and thinking about what they're thinking about. What do you have to say to those driven type A doers as opposed to thinkers? How do we make sure that they give time to assess how they're really doing?
Well, I would say you can't live right if you're not thinking right. And I don't know a single person, type A driven or otherwise, who doesn't have a dark side, who doesn't have those same nagging voices, even the ones saying, bury yourself in work, because if you're not succeeding, you don't have meaning. But I think what we have to remember is the voice of the Lord over Jesus at his baptism was, you're my son, well done. He hadn't cast out a demon, he hadn't turned water into wine, he was just a son. So the identity factor came into place before the activity. And a lot of us, I'm a type 3 Enneagram, believe me, I can get into the trap of if I didn't accomplish something today, I'd have no worth. But when we sit still before God, the voice of the Holy Spirit will say, I love you, and that's enough. And everything you do today can come out of that love, not be trying to get what you already have and can never lose.
That's amazing. And sometimes we experience things in our lives which are traumatic. We might touch upon your own experiences, Levi, but you talk about wearing trauma, or like kind of remembering trauma, wearing it as something that you don't forget easily. I'm not quoting you verbatim, but wearing it as a resemblance. Busyness can often cloud that out from our lives and stop us having to process it. Have you had to intentionally put blocks in your diary to make sure I'm going to do some Levi work now? It's going to be painful. It's going to involve pruning. I'm not going to enjoy the process, but actually this is going to help me expand and grow and enhance and enlarge my territory.
100%. And that's really one of the things I hope Take Back Your Life is for people, is a 40-day journey that can be here was the beginning, here was the end, and almost like a chance to look back on 40 days ago, I was struggling with this, and now I can actually see growth. I can see change. I can see some verses I memorized. I can see some prayers I wrote down. I can see some things that I gave to God and left there. And 40 is a big number, because in the Bible, it's a number of testing. It comes up again and again and again. Test, 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 test. 40 days, 40 years, 40, 40, 40. And is it any mistake that here we are in 2020, 20 plus 20 is 40. And this year, if it has been anything, it has been a year of testing. And I think a lot of us, marriages are popping, they're snapping. We're seeing the anxiety, the pornography, the alcohol, the drug addiction. I have a friend who is a nurse, and he was telling me he has literally seen 29-year-old people come in with literal their livers just gutted by the amount of alcohol they're consuming. People having 13 drinks a day just to take the despair of life away right now. And I think that that's symptomatic of a deeper issue. And it's easy to just push on and keep going, keep going, keep going. The trauma that you experienced 12 years ago, 50 years ago, you can keep going through to a point, but the better thing to do would be to pull over. And of course, you're going to lose the ground of whatever progress you would make today by taking that pit stop. But if you actually deal with that dysfunction, let it get healed, let God deal with it and get the help you need from a counselor, from your church community, in your own prayer life, and get better, you will. It's like stopping to sharpen a saw. Yeah, you have to stop, hacking some trees down, but with a sharp edge, imagine the progress you'll make when you're better.
I love that analogy. Wow. And, you've experienced, I was saying in a separate interview with your wife, Jenny, I was saying that what you've been through as a family is the worst thing a human being could face. And I don't like using the language "you've come through it" because it suggests that there's a final destination where the grief and the trauma stops. But how have you, in your grief process, for those that don't know, I'll let you share a little bit about your daughter Lenya, but for those that are struggling and don't see an end to their pain, like how do we know when we've recovered? How do we know when the trauma's over? How can we stop self-reflecting to a point where we know, okay, I'm whole now. I'm okay. We can keep going.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, first of all, my daughter Linya, when I was in 2012, had an asthma attack, died in my arms 5 days before Christmas. So that was that trauma. And I would say today, as I talk about her and think about her, it's with a smile. Like as I even just talked about her just now, it was, even though it's the worst day of our lives, there was a smile in my heart. And when people talk about Linya, yes, there are days where I cry, and yes, there are days when I'm sad about that. But by and large, in my heart, God has turned that sorrow into rejoicing, and He's taken away the ashes, and He's given me a festive crown of praise. And I'm not wearing clothes of mourning. I'm wearing that outfit of rejoicing. And I would say that to me, the healed wound, if you break a leg and you set it properly, it has the potential to actually have stronger bone growth than it had the accident not happened. So as I think about Linya, that's a healed, that's not a festering wound. Yes, God's still working in it, I'm in a process, but by and large, there's a great joy to it. And joy is not glib. Joy doesn't pretend there's not a casket in the ground. Joy looks at that and sees a greater truth and a greater resurrection and a greater hope. So that's a healed wound to me. Now, ironically, there are wounds that even in recent, as much as this morning, counseling that I'm still undergoing, have surfaced of traumas that were not as major potentially, but actually have greater capacity to take you out if they get added layer after layer like an onion. Right. Because oftentimes the big things in life, getting fired, getting raped, having a child die, you need help to deal with. But the little daily traumas we often accumulate, and the little hurts we don't get the proper medication and help we need. So they have, in some cases, the greater ability to wipe you out long term.
Mm. Take back your life. It's it's very authoritative. It's very assertive. It's very much you have control of doing this. Like, you can do this. You're not helpless. Control isn't an illusion. You actually can take life into your hands. What would you say to the person that's in this COVID situation, perhaps at home, and they're a bit disillusioned, discouraged, filled with doubt? Like, what pep talk would you give them if they were on your team? If you were to coach them through this for them to take back their life, where would you start?
Well, I would start with that. I really did want it to sound strong. Like, take up your mat. Take up your mat and walk.
Yeah.
Rise. Lazarus, come forth. Jesus doesn't play around, and he's not toying with people. He didn't say to the man lying there for 38 years, "Do you want to be made well?" like as a big joke. And I don't think that He who gave us the Spirit that raised Him from the dead, who even now has His Spirit yearning in you jealously like a lover, wanting you to not flirt with the world and the devil and your own selfish desires, but rise up in strength and power, become who you were meant to become, and take some ground before you die and go to heaven and rule and reign with Him for 1,000 years. I think He wants you right now to take back your life from alcoholism, from pettiness, from selfishness, from narcissism, from low living, from why didn't I get invited? Why didn't they tag me? Why did they get the opportunity? And He says to you, take back your life. For freedom you've been set free, and your life is racing by. Time is short, and it's like a vapor, and so get in the game.
I love that. And you say people's pain isn't an obstacle to being used by God. Some people will be believing that lie, that they've done too much, too many regrets, too many mistakes, too many failures, not enough opportunities, not the right background, you name it. People will be giving themselves that self-talk. So what would you say to them, those in deep, deep, deep pain at the moment?
I would say, I'm sorry. That is real, and that hurts. But then I would also say, God didn't make a mistake when He allowed you to have the trial that has come your way. He didn't screw up. He didn't say oops. An angel didn't bump his elbow as he was at the controls. He is sovereign king who sat at enthroned at the flood. And the flood is the worst thing this world's ever faced. FYI. Worse than COVID, worse than bird flu, worse than, you know, Biden-Trump debate, worse than anything, okay? The worst thing in this world was the flood, and he sat enthroned, meaning he was not standing at the edge, you know, worried. He was not like, oh no, what's happening? He was seated, and he sits as king forever. So in your life, the trial you're facing is real, and I'm not going to underscore that. It's horrible and hard. Your pain is real. That being said, I would encourage you to no longer allow yourself the easy pass of the victim's gait. The victim's gait is the walk of someone who says, well, I am because this happened, and I get to walk this way. When God's called you to the relaxed confidence of his child who believes he's in charge, and if he's in charge and he entrusted you with your pain, he intends to use it for good. So don't be the victim. Instead, be confident like Joseph. I've been sent into this trial. I've been sent into grief. I've been sent into being divorced. I've been sent into this by God for the saving of lives, starting with my own.
How important are declarations and the power of words and proclaiming the truth and the scriptures? Because, you know, like all teachings, like all things, it can be abused, you know, name it and claim it, blab it and grab it. What's your theology and perspective on us declaring things as though they are? So we've got every spiritual blessing in Christ. We're co-heirs with Christ. Like, how does that play into our spirituality?
I think it's vital. I think, according to Jesus, with apologies to your quadriceps and your gluteus maximus, which are physiologically speaking the most brute force strength muscles in your body, the four muscles that make up your tongue are actually, in my opinion, the most robust because they're the only muscle that can move mountains. For Jesus said, if you have faith, you can say to the mountain to be moved and it shall be moved. Now, what does he mean by that? In Jesus' day, there was not earth-moving vehicles, there was not TNT, there was not the ability to move a mountain. So the most impossible thing you could say was that mountain's going to move. Now today, we live in a day when literally you can move a mountain. They put highways through mountains. So we cannot believe Jesus' intention was for us to stand at mountains and move them. What he was saying was, whatever you deem impossible can be released through speech filled with faith.
Yeah.
Now, in my life, some of the greatest mountains that have needed moving are not external mountains, but internal mountains. And we know this, change the way we feel if we change the way we speak. Something as simple as gratitude has been shown by scientists and sociologists to release both serotonin and dopamine into your body. So thank you for having me on the program. Guess what? I began to overcome a mountain called depression through releasing gratitude. Now, I'm not saying you might not need medication, talk to your doctor, but what I am saying is when I speak in faith, like the Bible says, let the weak say I am strong, you really do move mountains. And so it's not about declarations of faith, which I'm big and I give them all throughout the book, are not about you pretending to be something you're not. It's about you rising up to lay claim to what Jesus said you are.
Wow. Can you say that last clause again? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's not me pretending I'm something I'm not. When I said to myself this morning, I'm a child of the King. When tomorrow I preach and I say to myself, I have been filled with the Holy Spirit that raised Christ from the dead. I am as bold as a lion. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Even though that's not how I feel. I feel nervous. I feel like, this message isn't going to go good. My study time is interrupted. Blah, blah. I feel that low. I rise up with verbal belief of faith. What I'm doing is I'm not pretending I'm something I'm not. I'm laying claim to what Jesus said I am.
Whew. You find, and this is partly a selfish question, I'd love to know this, but I'm sure many of our viewers would as well. If we were to kind of pierce the veil, get behind the curtain, to mix metaphors, people can assume that a significant pastor with great influence, making a great impact on a variety of platforms in the US and around the world, people could be thinking, I wonder what they're struggling with. Like, you know, do they have big problems? And I always assume that the problems get bigger as the influence increases. So my question is, how do you personally carry the weight of that and deal with the pressure of more influence, more expectations, more influence, more demands? Like, just walk us through that. I would love to know practically what you do to keep yourself focused and not focused on your feelings.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's the same. It. I've been told. I got into a big kick for a while where I was reading a lot of books written by sports psychologists, and I guess I'm fascinated by how do you get into the U.S. Open and not choke? How do you play in the Masters, and how do you go bat for the Yankees? Like and almost all of the great teams employ sports psychologists. So it tells you something, that it's not purely physical. A lot of it's mental. And the Bible has a lot to say about our mind. The Bible has a lot. That's why the subtitle of my book is 40 Days to Learning to Think Right So You Can Live Right. So I would say that my biggest takeaway was, interestingly enough, that the emphasis is put on the practice, so that when you get to the Super Bowl, the World Series, the NBA championship, that you're not putting a big, like, oh wow, on the big thing, because you've put such the reps in the small thing, that when you get there, you're listening to music to stay loose. You're thinking about the play. You're not thinking, this is it. That's how you choke. You choke when you go, oh, I finally made it to this church. I finally got the blue check mark. Oh, now I'm going to really, it's like I've been, since I was 19, preaching the word. That I'm prepping a sermon. I did it the same way. So it's another Bible study. It's another person. When I go to the hospital to pray with someone, this is pre-COVID, you can't really do that now. I'm on Zoom, right? When I'm doing those things, it's those small. So I don't think about, wow, I've really made it now. I mean, I'm thankful. I want to always be honoring God for what he's done, but I'm thinking about the next sermon, the next book, the next conversation, and I'm trying to aim small, and so I'll miss small. And not, I think Federer said when he comes into play, he never looks up and looks at the crowd. Now, there's no crowd now, but he said he never looks up, because it's not about the grandeur of the moment. It's about that next serve. And so that's kind of my goal. It's just to walk humbly, do justly, and do the next thing well until I go to heaven.
So preparation is actually part of the performance.
It is the performance. I think if you'll do today what others won't, you'll be able to do tomorrow what others can't.
Whew. I love that. Okay, final question, Levi. You've been exposed to a lot of great leaders. We talked about this a little bit in our last interview, but we talk about...
Wait, is that jacket All Saints? Are you wearing an All Saints jacket?
No, it's Boda Skins.
Ooh, it's even better. Okay, so All Saints ran a commercial. Sorry for interrupting. All Saints ran a commercial for a while online a while back, and I just thought of it while you said what you did about preparation, and I'll never forget it. They were showing how their jeans are made and their jackets are made. And if you're not familiar with All Saints, those at home, it's a leather jacket and jean company from the UK that got bought by John Barbados, and now is kind of big in America too. But it started out in England on Spitalfields Road in London.
Yeah, you know it. You know it.
Yeah. So they showed how jeans are made, and it's they do a lot with stones. They call them stone-washed denim. They have stones. They tumble. And they showed all this that you never would think that goes into making denim. But at the end of the commercial, this sentence appeared on the screen: the process is the product.
Oh, my word.
And that to me is, I feel like, how God makes a man or a woman in his image. And it is to do all his will. We want the product. The process is the product.
Wow. That's so challenging. That's so challenging. And it'll bleed into the final thought. And that thought is this: as you've been exposed to so many great leaders, how have you consciously seen them take their life back in those moments of great difficulty and despair?
I think there's, in the leaders I respect the most, there is an endlessness to their appetite for self-improvement, and they don't short circuit their evolution. They don't stop growing. They don't stop developing. They're eager. They're hungry. They're desirous of growth. And I think, to the degree, like life is not so simple as I was in a cocoon, I got out, and now I have a butterfly. I think God is. I hate snakes, so I really despise the analogy.
Me too.
But snakes shed their skin every month or something like that. And if they don't, their eyes get infected because they get to shed the skin off their eye. They're shedding their skin. So I feel like God is always from glory to glory, from grace to grace. Therefore, he gives more grace. The Spirit yearns jealously, like he wants more. He wants more of you. And to the degree that you stop shedding last month's skin, like the great leaders don't stop. And a snake that's shedding its skin is vulnerable. It can get hurt, it can get attacked. But if you don't pull over to shed that last skin, you can't do what you're called to do next. And so I think some of us think, I went through discipleship. I went to Youth for Christ. I went to Promise Keepers. I was in cocoon. Now I'm a butterfly. So no, the great leaders know you're only as good as the next skin that you're shedding to get to the next level.
So you could be only as good as your last performance.
That's
I know with preaching we can't use
a rather macabre way to look at it, because I'm not talking about what you're doing. I'm talking about who you're becoming.
Yes.
That's why Jonah ends the way it does. If you think about the last chapter of Jonah, it's rather weird because it involves a worm. It involves a branch. It involves God kind of messing with Jonah. And you're like, he did it. He preached. Like, leave the guy alone. The whole city got saved. And God's like, hey, the work might be finished, but the man is unfinished. And so God's working on Jonah. And it ends with this question. Like, God's like, do you not care about him? Like, you did the work great. You preached real well. You wrote that book. What about your heart? And so God's trying to get Jonah to that next evolution.
Amazing. Well, I think your book, Take Back Your Life, is going to help a lot of people, Pastor Levi. All the details are going to appear on the lower thirds now. As we close, how can people find you, Levi, and what's coming up for you guys and Fresh Life next?
Yeah, so if you Google Levi Lusko, you'll find some weird articles that people have written who don't like me very much, but you'll also find my Instagram, which is where I post pictures of my kids. And every once in a while, something about my bicycle or my wife or church as well.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for your time, Levi. We love you, and thanks for pouring into us today.
Thank you, Rob.
Cheers.